are they doing this? They're just taking Indiana Jones and they're raping him!
Hi, I'm Jason, and this is The Cultural Breakdown. When Disney bought the rights to Lucasfilm, it was obvious that they wanted to do something with the Indiana Jones character. Personally, I think they should have just left it alone and probably collected the royalties, but they were going to continue on with the character anyway, so whatever. I mean, it's their choice. I personally disagree with it. But the question was, what are they going to do with it? Harrison Ford is obviously getting too old for continuing it. So the question is, are they going to just remake it or something like that? Recast the character? A lot of people were suggesting Chris Pratt as the character of Indiana Jones, but ultimately they decided to do a soft reboot sequel sort of thing where they have an older Indiana Jones come in and pass the torch off to someone else. I mean, kind of what they did with Star Wars, to the detriment of Star Wars. But anyway, that's the choice that they tried to make. When I first heard about this, I mean, I didn't think it was a good idea. And this last week, I've been kind of, I wouldn't say dunking on it, but I mean, just reporting the bad news happening with it. But when I did go to see it, I did want to like it. I did try to have an open mind going into it. And in some ways, it exceeded my expectations, but in other ways, it was lower than them. The biggest issue I had is I saw potential in here for a good story, but ultimately it did just fail in how it executed that. At the start of the movie, it has a sequence in Nazi Germany at the end of World War II. In it, a de-aged Indy and his friend are trying to recover an object from a group of Nazis led by Mads Mikkelsen, and overall I thought that sequence was pretty good. It felt like a lot of the classic Indiana Jones movies. If we basically just got that movie, I would have been okay. Just have Indy and his accomplice recovering the Dial of Destiny from a group of Nazis led by Mads Mikkelsen. But they obviously can't have a digitally de-aged Harrison Ford for the whole movie, so they only recovered half of it and the other half is still lost. The movie flashes forward to 1969, and the rest of the movie is an old Indy and his friend's daughter, this time played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, trying to recover the other half of the dial from a group of Nazis led by Mads Mikkelsen. You know, it's funny how even though this movie takes place in 1969 at the height of the Cold War, Disney decided to make Nazis the enemy this time instead of the Soviets like they did with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I don't know why they didn't want to make the communists the bad guy, though.
I mean, I know socialism is a charged word, but we can learn a lot from this.
Overall, it seemed like the plot could work, but they messed up the execution. The main issue with this movie is it's trying to have Indiana Jones pass the torch, so to speak, to Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character, because in past Indiana Jones movies, he's the main character and everyone else is a secondary character. They're not necessarily lesser, they're just a secondary character, and they're still competent and capable, and they have their own strengths and weaknesses. But when you have this weird thing like they're doing in this movie where you try to have both people be main characters and secondary characters, there's a strange dynamic between them that doesn't really work. It's almost as if you had two cops doing a good cop, bad cop routine, but each cop is constantly switching between which part they're playing in it, and it just doesn't work out. You need to have a defined characterization for these people. Also, the way they portray Indy is insulting to the character. When it cuts to 1969, we see an old, pathetic-looking Indiana Jones, and one of the first things he does is yell at his younger neighbors. He's basically not happy with his life. He's retiring from teaching, his wife is divorcing him, and he really doesn't have anything to live for. Director James Mangold said he wanted to tell a story about Indiana Jones getting old because Harrison Ford is an old guy, and you can't deny it. But did they really have to make his life so sad? I mean, did they have to have his wife divorcing him, his son dead? I mean, and he just has a miserable existence. Maybe the filmmakers figured Indiana Jones wouldn't risk his life if his family's still around and he has something to live for. But I mean, he did steal half the Dial of Destiny at the start of the movie. So when the Nazis are coming back to get him, they obviously know he has something to do with it. So they're coming after him and it kind of pulls him back into it against his will. I mean, there's something with there. At least that's a possibility. I think that's better than just killing off his son and removing his wife entirely. Instead, we get Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character approaching him about finding the Dial of Destiny. And it's an opportunity for him to go out on one last adventure as if he needs her help. First of all, her character is really annoying. She comes across as arrogant and has a sense of unearned accomplishment about her. Her biggest strength is her father devoted his life to finding the other half of the dial, and she just memorized his notes. In Last Crusade, Indy did follow his father's notes on the Holy Grail, but Indy did have to figure stuff out on his own, and he did find some missing pieces that his father didn't know about. But in this one, you just have Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character literally just memorize the work of someone else and treats it as her own sense of accomplishment. Her character almost feels like a bad self-insert at the assistance of Kathleen Kennedy. Indiana Jones needs a strong, independent woman to tell him what's what. She needs to be smart, confident, pretty. How do we convey that to the audience? I don't know. Just have her outright say it out loud.
You end up like this.
I mean, resourceful, daring, beautiful, self-sufficient.
Then we have the villains. Mads Mikkelsen is actually a good choice if you wanted to have a smart, cunning villain with the intimidating presence about him. But that only works so far. If he doesn't have a script that supports such a character, then there's nothing much he can do. I mean, if the script is basically making him a dumb character, well, he can't portray a smart character if he's supposed to be playing a dumb character. In previous Indiana Jones movie, there's usually like the main baddie or two, and then Indiana Jones still has to deal with like the Nazis, an Indian death cult, the Soviet Union. I mean, basically these other nations with armies, or at least people who have armies behind them. In this movie, it's literally just Mads Mikkelsen and a half dozen or so henchmen. When these guys are so dumb and inept, I mean, the only reason they're actually a threat to Indiana Jones is just the fact that he's so old. And even then, a lot of it just comes across as goofy. I mean, they're not in the least bit intimidating. And in previous Indiana Jones movies, they would have just been throwaway villains for him to beat up, and that's about it. But in this movie, they're supposed to be treated as if they're a real threat, which didn't work in the least bit. The goal of Mads Mikkelsen's character in this movie is he wants to get the two halves of the Dial of Destiny because he believes when you can do that, you can control time, and he wants to go back in time to 1938, kill Hitler, and take over Nazi Germany because he thinks Hitler lost them the war and he can do better. There's an irony with the plot of this movie that the villain spent his past sitting in the background and watching others ahead of him do a job that he thought he could do better. Now that he's in control, he utterly fails. In the end, this movie had the potential if they tried to tell an Indiana Jones story. Instead, they wanted to set up a future movies with different characters. Since no character can hold a candle to how iconic Indiana Jones was, the filmmakers decided to tear down Indiana Jones instead. It makes it easier to sell a replacement character when you've torn down the previous character. As bad as Crystal Skull was, at least you could tell there was some respect they had for the character. It was a little misguided in the execution since they were trying to take the serial adventures from the 30s and 40s and then bring it into the 50s, so then make a sci-fi thing with it. I mean, it didn't work, but at least you can appreciate the effort, or at least I can. But this movie, there's really none of that with it. It's just strikes me as somewhat bitter, or someone who doesn't like the Indiana Jones franchise and then wanted to do something different with it, almost like they're wearing it as a skin suit. Unfortunately for Disney and Lucasfilm, we still have the originals. I just rewatched Raiders after watching this movie as kind of a palate cleanser, and it still holds up perfectly well. I mean, the first three movies are all fantastic, and in my mind, Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny are basically what they are. They're bad studio fan fiction that can be completely disregarded, and you don't even have to see it again or even acknowledge its existence. Those are bad movies. This is a terrible movie. No one needs to watch it. And for me, the movie trilogy ended the way it's supposed to be, with Indiana Jones riding off into the sunset like the classic heroes. Thanks for watching the first review I chose to do on this channel. And if you like it, make sure you click the like button, and maybe I'll do more of them in the future. And as always, share the video out there and subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and then you can keep up to date with the latest news. Thank you.